Welcome all, and thank you for joining today's EBP Audits with DataSnipper training. I'm going to allow 1 more minute to have everyone else join in, and then we'll kick off today's session. For those of you who have just joined, you will have received an invite email today, but also yesterday, including a link to the materials where you can download them. You will be able to download the materials by clicking on that link on which the download will be prompted, and that will include all the materials that we'll be covering today. Today's session is interactive, so that means that by downloading those materials, you can click along with me during today's session. I see we have a question coming in through the chat already, so let me briefly take a look there. And I see indeed that this is the download link, which is now included in the chat. So you can also use that link if you haven't downloaded the files yet to download the training materials, and you can click along during this session. I strongly do recommend to download those materials, as that will enhance your learning experience during today's session. Now I see we have we're 1 minute past the hour, so let's start today's session. So once again, welcome and thank you for joining. For those of you joining in right now, please make sure to download the training materials through the emails that you've received from us, or by using the link in the chat, as that will allow you to click along during today's session. My name is Elliot. I'm an audit transformation manager within DataSnipper, and today I'll be talking you through how DataSnipper can be used in performing EBP audits. Today's session is interactive, so not only will allow you to click along, but you can also raise questions either by means of the chat, the Q&A functionality, but also by means of a Menti presentation. And that is the presentation that we're seeing right here on screen at the moment. So if all of you could please take out your phone or go to the Menti website and type in the code on the left-hand side, or scan the QR on the right-hand side, then we'll have some questions for you coming up shortly, as we're very keen to get to know you better and learn more from your experiences with using DataSnipper. If at any given time you have a question, then please do feel free to send it in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to attend to your questions. Okay, I see these signups to Menti are going well. Let's allow some more time for the rest to join. Also, if at any given time you accidentally click away the Menti website, you will see the Menti website and code on the top of the screen, so you can always still join in later on. For the audience that has recently joined, if you haven't downloaded the training materials already, then please use the link included in the chat, which will bring you to the download location of the training materials, which will allow you to click along during today's session. I see we have quite a large number of participants on Menti, so let's proceed to our first question. So my first question is curious about how many EBP engagements you currently have going on, or that you currently work on. Okay, I see this ranges a lot between either 0 to 5, but also 15 or more. So I'm very curious to see what you will think of today's training and how this can further benefit you in performing your EBP audits. I see some raised hands and some questions coming into the chat. Patrick, are there any questions that we need to attend to at this moment? Or are they all in relation to downloading the materials?
Elliot, it's in relation to downloading the materials, and I've answered them. So the Menti code and the materials are available in the chat again.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks all for responding to this first question. And I see we have a lot of variation between the number of EBP audit engagements that are currently going on. Now, I hope that in the next few use cases, which we're going to cover during today's session, that you will not only see the opportunity that DataSnipper can bring, but also see the added value of those templates themselves and how they could potentially be applied in performing your own procedures. So today's training will cover how DataSnipper can be applied in performing EBP audits. This session today is an advanced training, which means we assume that everyone has already followed previous trainings within their firm or attended other open trainings, which we have hosted before. Therefore, we will assume a base knowledge of all of the functionalities and will not explain everything in full details from the start on how to initiate the individual functionalities. If at any given time you do want me to reiterate any of the steps, then please do not hesitate to let me know, as I want to make sure that everyone understands all of the procedures that we're going to be performing today. And we'll be looking into how we're going to be going through these steps on the next slide. After having gone through all of these use cases and shown how DataSnipper can be of value to you, we're also going to take a look at how you can continue to further expand your knowledge on applying DataSnipper in your day-to-day audits within EBP, but also other areas. So how can you do an EBP audit with DataSnipper? Well, in today's training, we're going to look at a number of areas, and we're going to kick off by firstly looking at how DataSnipper can be applied in assessing service organizations and internal controls, as those are an integral part in how EBP plans are executed, and therefore it's of utmost importance that you can also use DataSnipper in that area. We'll be looking at a pre-filled template and also analyzing how we can further enhance and make it more specific. Then we'll go and look at how employee contribution testing can be performed by utilizing DataSnipper's form extraction functionalities and document matching tools to further enhance your experience and efficiency. Then we'll also look into a very detailed example of how participant loans can be tested by utilizing a various combination of DataSnipper's functionalities, including automation functionalities, but also manual snipping. And finally, we'll look at how DataSnipper can be of assistance in assessing planned financial statements. So at this point, we're now going to transition to our learning materials. And if you've downloaded the learning materials, you will see that upon unzipping the folder, there are 5 individual folders. We're going to be going through these folders one by one. So therefore, when downloading the materials and unzipping the files, make sure that you store them on a location which you can easily access, as we'll be using these files frequently. Now, for our first example, we're going to go to the service organizations folder. In the service organizations folder, you're going to see a file called Service Organization Assessment. I'd like everyone to open that file, and then we can kick off the first example. So we're going to be looking at how DataSnipper can be applied in assessing SOC reports. Now, we know that a lot of accounting firms have centralized departments where they assess the SOC reports initially, and then it's up to the engagement teams to assess those outcomes and findings and to make any judgment calls that are required based on the contents of the reports and assessed reports. So in our example, we've received the pre-populated SOC report work paper. And we're going to be going through all of the individual tabs that we see here to go through what work has been performed and how we also, as reviewers of these reports, can make sure that we understand what information has been extracted. So upon clicking on tab Understanding, we see that the understanding of the service organization has been documented, also by means of assessing the SOC report. We simply click on all of the individual snips, which will navigate us through all of the areas and the individual documents as to where the snips have been placed. Now we also see that not only the SOC report, but also the service level agreements and other documents have been included. For us, it's now very clear to trace down where all the information has been obtained from, and very easily for us to assess if indeed this has been done correctly. We also see that there are a few core areas which we need to look out for, such as the complementary user entity controls, where we are also going to look at in the next few tabs. So this will allow us to very easily validate and store all of the required information to ensure a clear audit trail and full support of all of the work that has been performed. We'll then transition to the tab Internal Controls, where we see that our centralized department has assessed each of the individual controls as part of the SOC report. And we see that this now provides us a very clear overview of all of the controls included, which have been extracted by means of the table snip, therefore making it very easily to also see exactly which controls are included, what testing procedures have been performed, and will allow us to assess those test results and procedures to see if it has any impact on our audit. So we can simply navigate through all of the individual snips made, and it will, of course, in the document viewer on the right-hand side, be traced down to each of the individual pages as to where this information has been extracted from. Therefore, making it very clear and easy for us, and no longer requiring us to add in manual PDF stamps on individual SOC reports or other areas. Then if we transition to the next tab for the complementary user entity controls, we see that we now need to start populating this tab. So it's up to us to utilize DataSnipper to extract this information. Now, the text that we see here at the top in row 4 is actually linked to a previous cell. So we see it's linked to internal controls. Whenever we link a cell to another snip, you will also see that upon clicking on that cell, that the snip is also highlighted in the document viewer, which has now brought us to the complementary user entity controls. We're going to be extracting all of these complementary user entity controls into our table here, so we can assess them individually. Now, we can, of course, do this with the text snip, but we can also use the table snip. So I'm going to select the table snip in the DataSnipper ribbon. Then I make sure that I select the correct output location, which will be cell B7. And then in my document, I will simply draw the table snip over the text that I want to extract. Now, this is not necessarily a table, but the table snip still does allow us to easily extract this information. Although we do see that it's not being grouped in the rows that we would like, we can then use the 3 dots in the table snip on our file to edit the rows, where we will simply remove all of the lines which we don't require to ensure that we have each of the complementary user entity controls on individual lines. So we just remove all the other ones we don't want by clicking on the minus. And as we can see, this is then automatically rearranged in our cells as well. So we've now been able to extract this information fairly easily. If we accidentally remove one, we can also still add the line back with the plus button. And we can then continue. Now, as you can see, if we then wrap the text, we now have a clear overview of all of the information that we need to assess. Now we see that we have skipped a few, so we will continue to remove all of these lines that we don't need, where we see again that we clicked on away. So you simply add or remove each of the individual lines. I see some questions coming into the chat. Patrick, is there anything that we need to discuss?
Yeah, definitely. Some good question from Chris. He is mentioning that SOC reports are oftentimes secured and text cannot be copied, recognized easily. And if there's a way within DataSnipper, or how does DataSnipper work with this?
Yeah, so if the PDF file itself is locked, indeed, when opening it on your local machine, you will not be able to add stamps. If you want to create snips, you can still upload the file into DataSnipper, but you will not be able to edit any of the contents on it, like adding comments. So you will be able to create snips, but it's best to have the password on hand as well, as that will also, of course, allow you to edit the PDF on the background too. Does that sufficiently answer your question?
I would have a small addition to that, Elliot. DataSnipper uses text recognition as well. So if you don't have the password of the SOC report, you could simply make some print screens out of it and import the print screens into DataSnipper to achieve your goal as well. And that will allow you to obtain the text from the report.
Yeah.
One other question we had from Lauren is, how do you make the document viewer available on the right-hand side of Excel?
That is a very good question. So if you go to the DataSnipper ribbon here, you also see that we have a viewer button. Upon clicking on the viewer button, you have the option to show in Excel, which it does by default, or to show in second screen. If you have a second screen available, I can briefly demonstrate this, it will appear in a full view. I currently only have one screen in front of me, hence it's viewable on the same screen, but this allows you to move it around and enlarge it if you have a larger screen available. If I now want the viewer to go back to be in Excel, I simply click on Show in Excel. Okay, any other questions?
No, and obviously you need to have DataSnipper installed to have this all available to you, but we're assuming you have when you're in this session. But otherwise, no questions, Elliot, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Then let's proceed. So we've now been able to extract all of the complementary user entity controls in our Excel. So we now have a clear view of which of the complementary user entity controls are present, and we can individually start assessing them. While going through them one by one, we've also identified that we're going to have to test all of these controls. As in the SOC report, it makes mention that in order for us to rely on the SOC report, the user also needs to have these controls present. Hence, testing them is our next step. But before we transition to individually testing these controls, we need to make sure that we've covered all of the aspects included in this SOC report. So there might be other services that are relied upon by the service organization, such as subservice organizations. So we're going to transition to the tab subservice, where we see that already a snip has been made in regards to the reporting method, where it says this does not include controls at external subservice organizations, which means that we independently need to start assessing whether all of these reports include any mention of subservice organizations. Now, rather than scanning through the document manually, what we can do is we can use DataSnipper's search and snip function to simply search through the document. So we already see that we have the term search or subservice organization right here. By clicking on that cell, the content of that cell will be loaded into my search pane here on the right-hand side. I can now simply hit the search button, and DataSnipper will scan through all of the files that are currently present within my workbook and will identify on which of the pages and which of the files this piece of text is included. So I can now very easily scan through to see if indeed a mention is made of any subservice organizations. And I see that we have it occurring on multiple pages, some of them within controls, but we also see here on page 24 that Clearstream seems to be a subservice organization. So this would be something that we need to create a snip for. So what we can then do is we've now located the location by hovering over the search result. We can then simply choose the text snip and draw our snip over the name of the subservice organization, where DataSnipper will then look for the next available cell on the right-hand side, and we'll paste the snip. We then, of course, also need to make sure that we assess the services provided. So we will then again use the text snip, where we see that this subservice organization performs functions on behalf of the custody services provided, but it's on two different rows. So if I want to include this piece of text in the same cell, I would firstly draw the first text snip over the first part of the sentence, or I will then proceed to the second part of the sentence and hold the control key on my keyboard and draw the text snip over the second part, which I want to add. DataSnipper will then include both of these items of text in my cell, so I still have the full sentence. I can then simply remove the mark that DataSnipper adds whenever you add multiple pieces of text, and we'll then wrap this to make it more clear. So we've now also identified that we need to assess the Clearstream service organizational control report. We currently don't have that, but we would repeat the same process like we've done in this example to go through each of the individual SOC reports which we are required to assess. This should provide you some more insights into how DataSnipper can be applied in assessing SOC reports. And before we transition to our next example, I would like to know if there are any questions at this moment.
No additional questions, Elliot. We can proceed.
Okay, that is good to hear. Then let's transition to our next example. So we're going to close the file that we had open right now, and we're going to go back to our learning materials. This will require us to go to folder number 2, CUECs, which stands for Complementary User Entity Controls, where we will see a tab called CUEC Testing. And we're going to open this Excel. I'll give you all some time to also locate the file and open it. And if you do have any questions in advance, then please do let me know. You'll also notice that upon opening this workbook, the document viewer appears on the right-hand side, and this will therefore indicate that all of the files we need have already been included. Once you've opened the file, please navigate to tab Test of Control, where we see that we already have a test sheet available, which includes some of the details of the control that we're going to be looking at, which is control A16, and it includes the description where it says that this is a control where the user entity should perform a timely review of reports for holdings and cash balances and related activity and provide written notice in the event of any discrepancies. We then, by means of inquiry, learned that the client has identified 2 control attributes for this control where they perform multiple checks. So by looking at this, we now know that they check all of the reports for individual contents of their reports, and they reconcile it on individual level, but also on total level of all of the investments. The second one is that they also need to make sure that they provide written notice whenever they find a discrepancy. So we're going to be assessing all of the documents, all of the reports, and looking out for those attributes. Now we see that we have one report present at this moment, and it's a municipal bonds report. So let's start documenting this by using DataSnipper's manual snipping functionalities, where I'm going to click on cell C14, and we're going to start documenting our control. So we'll use the text snip to capture all of the text that we want to import. So we also have the municipal bonds, and of course the report date. And now we can start looking at the attributes. Now there are a number of things we can do. So we want to validate multiple things. So we're going to be looking at the contents of this report, where we see that in documenting the control, the user entity has performed a check where it includes a visible notification that indeed they have assessed the reports. We, of course, now need to inspect this. If we feel that this is indeed appropriate, we can add our first validation snip here by drawing it over the numbers. Then we will go to the ledger report and also indeed see, hey, they have indeed performed their tick marks. So I could then, of course, also add my validation snip here. And I want this all to be linked to the same cell. So I'm going to apply the control key functionality again and draw my second validation snip. You will now see that two snips have been linked to one cell. However, we've now merely done this check based on the comments we see. And it's up to us, of course, to validate whether this has indeed been done correctly. So I'll remove these snips and we'll go back to the supporting docs. Now, rather than ticking and tying this manually and inspecting each of the individual amounts, we're going to be using DataSnipper's functionalities to do so. So I'm going to use the table snip again to extract this ledger table. I'm just going to simply draw it over all of the details. I'm going to exclude the header by simply just dragging it down, as I already have my headers here present. And then we see that we have our information here. Now I see it's missing a cell, so I'm going to edit the rows, and we see that the line is included there. So now we've very easily been able to extract the information. We can now utilize document matching, where by clicking on document matching, we will be able to allow DataSnipper to perform the checks for us. Now, as this is a template, and we strongly encourage using templates, we have been able to predefine this setup, which means you can configure your files and templates like we've done here to already include all of the document matching settings. All you would have to do is to add the correct files, which we see has been done already here. If you would test other sample items as well, we would simply use the pencil of this document group to add any other documents or even import them directly from this location. Okay, hold on, there is a bar in the way. Okay, so now that we have our first information included and we already have included the document matching setup, all that is left for us is to now click match all rows, where DataSnipper will perform the checks for us on the individual booking entries to validate that indeed the amounts are consistent. We see that document matching has returned a snip for each of the rows, which means it has been able to find a direct match. Where we also see that based on our formulas included here, there are no differences included in between. We do see here that for one of the items, it adds on total and not on individual investment level. So that is something that we need to investigate. So we can then click on the table snip to go back to our previous file, which is the ledger report, and we see that it only includes it on a high level, not on an individual investment level. So this is a finding that we have already. So attribute number one, although it may seem as if everything has been performed, is in fact not consistent. Then if we closely look at the attribute, we also see that it has not been assessed on a total level, so we're going to add an exception here. So we're going to draw the exception on both of the locations, on both of the files. So we've also been able to assess this. So we're going to use the control key functionality again, as we want to indicate both of the locations where we've assessed this. Now, simply drawing our exception snips might not make it specifically clear as to why we noted an exception. So we want to add maybe some more details. And we can do that in a number of ways. We can do that by using the comment functionality here in the DataSnipper ribbon, by simply clicking on comment and drawing a comment box on any given location in our document viewer. This will then allow us to provide inputs where we can define what we exactly identified, which would be not all investments have been assessed on individual level, nor on total level. Hence, attribute one is ineffective. So now this will provide additional clarity. It's important to note, though, that this comment is only visible on the ledger report now. If I would navigate to the other report, I will not see my comment. So the other solution would be to change the contents of the cell. So we now see it includes a red X, but we could include the same contents, such as our comment, where it would still have our direct linkages, but it would provide more details in the cell itself. We would then proceed to A2, which would mean we would need to send out a check if discrepancies have been identified. We have identified an ineffective attribute, but that does not need any clarification that they need to inform Morgan Stanley. So A2, as no discrepancies were identified in their report, will be not applicable. And now we've been able to assess this control very quickly without having to do any manual inspections of all of the underlying figures. We've been able to leverage off table snip, document matching, and manual snipping to document our controls clearly. I would like to know if there are any questions at this moment about the functionalities we've displayed so far.
I don't see any questions in the chat at this time, but everyone feel free to post questions in both the Q&A and or the chat to engage with us.
Yep.
I see one coming in.
Yeah.
How is comments different than an X? So he's basically asking why you changed the X in Excel to a comment.
Yeah, so and this was an illustration, but we would of course provide more details by saying exception noted due to, well, whatever reason why we identified our exception. It was a matter of illustration, but a valid remark. So you would have the ability to provide your comment in this cell where the reviewer will then see, oh, there's already a comment here. There's an exception noted. And by clicking on it, of course, they will see all of the snips which have been made on the individual documents.
Right, and we have two more questions on the recording, if it will be made available to the participants.
Yes, that is a very good question. The recording will be shared later after the session, most likely on Monday, but you will receive an email including a link to the recording. Any other questions?
No, not for now. I think we can continue.
Okay, then I have a question for you guys. I am curious to hear what your thoughts are on the current pace that we've maintained in the examples we've gone through. Do you think it's manageable or is the pace too high? In the event that the pace is too high, then please do let me know so I can adjust the pace in the upcoming examples, as I want to make sure that all of you can follow along and click along with the examples we're displaying. Okay, I see the majority says it's fast, so I will make sure to slow down the pace in the upcoming examples. If at any given time you still feel that I'm going too fast, then please do let me know so I can adjust the pace. And at the meantime, I think there's some questions coming in the chat. You're on mute, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. Another question from Tay. I need to read it, sorry. So will the snip files, do they need to be attached to the Excel for the functionalities to work?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Do they need to be attached?
Yeah, do they need to be included in Excel? And yeah, what will it do with the file size and the manageability of the workbook?
Okay, that is a very good question. So if we go to our DataSnipper ribbon, you will see that we have a toggle included here in our ribbon, which includes the mention of include PDFs in Excel. This is switched on by default. This means that at the moment that you import documents, those files will be housed within the Excel workbook file. So that means that the file size would indeed be the size of the Excel, including the underlying documents. So in our current file, we see that is almost 400 kilobytes, which is not that large. But indeed, a valid remark is if you upload a lot of documents, your file size will also increase. What you can do is you can toggle off include PDFs, but that will require you to firstly extract and make sure that you have the imported files on a similar location as well. So I now want to exclude the PDFs from Excel. I will hit OK. And now it will exclude these files. If I save it, you will then also see that now my file size has been reduced to 57 kilobytes, which is a lot less. What this now does mean, though, is that all of these files will be retrieved by DataSnipper from the location where they were stored initially. That means in the DataSnipper tab, which is added by default whenever you import a new file, it will locate the files on these locations. That therefore means that you do not have to house the files internally within the workbook at all times, but upon opening this workbook, DataSnipper will search connection to the file and import it into its document viewer. and therefore it will still always be able to use all of the functionalities, regardless of whether you choose to include or exclude the PDFs in Excel. Does that sufficiently answer your question?
I hope it does, but they let us know if it doesn't. A couple of other questions are coming in. So how can you match? So with the document matching functionality, how can you do it with multiple identifiers in the same row for larger data sets?
Okay, that is a very good question. And in our next example, we're going to go more in depth in document matching. So I will get back to that question in the next example.
Okay. I think the others I'll just answer through the chat so we can keep the pace with the demonstration.
Okay, then we're going to proceed to our next example. So we're going to close this Excel file again, and we're going to transition back to our learning materials. And this time we're going to be looking at folder number 3, contribution testing. I repeat, we're going to be looking at folder number 3, contribution testing. And upon opening this folder, you will see that we now have an Excel file, but also 2 other folders. And we're going to start off with the Excel file called contribution testing. So if you could all open the file, then we will go from there. And this file is a bit different as opposed to the others, as this one does not include any information. So we're going to be importing these files ourselves. Upon opening this file, you will transition to tab contribution testing, where we will see that we have our template available. And we here now want to inspect all of the contributions and elective deferral amounts as denoted on the W-2 forms. And we want to compare that against the individual participant statements to see if indeed those exact amounts have been contributed towards the participant's benefit plan. Now, we can do this in a number of ways. We've already looked at manual snipping. We've seen some document matching coming by, but we want to very easily extract this information and then also perform the reconciliation. And if we would go to the DataSnipper tab, you see that we have quite a few options available. All of them are currently grayed out, and that is because in order for us to start using it, we need to import our files. So we're firstly going to import our documents by using the Import Documents button here on the left-hand side, and we'll choose Import Documents. There, it will automatically show us the folder where we opened the Excel from. If it doesn't show this folder yet, then please navigate to folder 3.contribution testing, and we'll click on File folder W2 forms, where we see that we have 10 forms included. I would like you all to select all 10 of them and then hit open, as this will then import the files into DataSnipper. Now, once again, the file that we're looking at is a template file, which means we have readily created this template. And if you would do the same within your audits, that means you can also pre-configure document matching like we did in the previous examples. After having uploaded our files, we see the document viewer appear where we have all of our files here, which we can view with the dropdown, and we can start looking at what we want to do. Now we're looking for 3 specific elements. We want the employee name, the wages, and the elective deferral amount. And we could, of course, do this with manual snipping, but that would mean we'd have to go through each individual file manually. We can also use DataSnipper's automation functionalities, such as form extraction, to basically instruct DataSnipper to do this for us. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing in this example. So if you click on form extraction in the DataSnipper ribbon, a new overview will be presented. And I'm going to enlarge it to make it more visible. And upon opening form extraction, you firstly see the landing page where you see a brief explanation and an explanatory video. For those of you who have not worked much with form extraction yet, you can watch this video later on whenever you start with form extraction, and it will talk you through all the steps again if you want to reiterate your understanding. We're going to click on Get Started, and that will bring us to the form extraction overview. Now, there's an important few things to note. So we see on the left-hand side here a live view, similarly as the document viewer, of all our files that we have included. And we have a drop-down to enable us to navigate through each of the individual files. Above that, we see a repetition function, which basically means we want the snips to be repeated in which different order. We currently have a W2 form on each page, 1 form per document per page, which means we are going to instruct DataSnipper on this document where we want all of the information to be extracted. So we want this to be repeated per document. What DataSnipper will do is, after we now start making our snips on this file, is it will apply these snips on all of the other documents that we have included in our workbook. So we make sure that we have repeat per document selected. And then we can start assessing our files. So we're looking for the employee name, and we're going to go with the first name. So what we will do is, once we've ensured that the repeat per document function is applied, we'll choose any of the given files, and we're going to draw our snip over the employee's first name. And I'll make sure to drag the cell a bit longer, as some of the names might be lengthier, and we want to make sure that we capture all of the text. You will then see, after drawing that snip, that on the right-hand side here, the preview results are already included. And we can see that for each of the other W2 forms, DataSnipper has automatically been able to identify the names for us. If I click on, for example, John here, it will bring us to that document and will show in a yellow highlight here the name John, which indicates that this piece of text will be extracted, but also indicates that this will be the location of where DataSnipper will paste the snip for us if we hit extract. I'm going to go back to our first example, and we're going to complete the remaining snips we need. So we also want the wages included here in area 1. I incorrectly drew the snip. Let's do that again and draw it over the amount, where we see that DataSnipper replicates this for all of the other areas as well. And we'll finally do it for the elective deferral amount, which is in cell 12A. We're simply going to draw our snip there as well. And form extraction replicates all of these snips for all of the other pages. Once we've done this, we can simply hit extract, and DataSnipper will create an output tab with all of our snips included. Now we're going to copy this. So we're going to select all of the cells, copy it with Ctrl+C, go to our contribution testing tab, and paste it in cell B15 with Ctrl+V. Our direct linkages to the underlying files are maintained. And as you can see, we can now very easily navigate through all of the individual W2 forms. Are there any questions about these steps we just performed before I dive into more detail?
We have a couple of questions, Elliot.
Okay.
There's one question about the repeat option. So for some of the participants it's not available. So maybe you can explain when it is available.
Yes, so that is a very good question. And I think we have multiple attendees here working on various different versions of DataSnipper. So the repeat per button is included from version 4 and onwards. Therefore, if you're on version 3, you will not be able to see the repeat function. Note that you will still be able to draw all of the snips like we've done here. You will just simply not be able to define the repetition criteria. So on the document where you create all your snips, DataSnipper will still replicate the same process. So you don't have to worry that you're missing out on the functionalities that we're demonstrating today.
Yeah. All right. Some other questions about form extraction. Does form extraction work with non-uniform documents and files that are in different sizes?
That is a very good question. So that also brings me to the next step. Form extraction works whenever you have files that have a very consistent or similar layout, such as a bunch of W2 forms. So upon drawing our snips, DataSnipper will look for reference points, and these reference points are called keys. We can view the keys that have been selected by simply clicking on one of the snips, where the key will be highlighted in blue underlining. And we see, it's a bit hard for this one, so let me select another one. We see that DataSnipper here has searched for the word only and uses this as its key. What this now means is that upon drawing this snip, DataSnipper chose only as its key, and will calculate the distance from the word only to the area where we drew our snip. It will remember this key, and for all of the other files, such as the next one, it will then search for the key, and it will then apply the distance between the snipped area and the key that was identified on the first page, and will replicate the snip on that location. Therefore, you need to have a layout that is consistent, as if the keys are not consistently on the same location, you will not get a consistent output of the values you want to extract. Now, you might have seen that the key here, which was selected as only, was not the most logical one. You might, for example, want it to be wages, tips, and other compensation. We can then simply click on the snip with our right mouse button and select Edit Keys to identify and select the keys we would prefer, such as clicking on wages, tips, and other compensation. So we've now defined that these three words are going to be the key for our snip. So you have the ability to change it, and particularly when you have very condensed files or specific files like these, you want to make sure that the keys are specific. So if there's, for example, another location where the word only is included, and you only have the word only, then DataSnipper might see that key as a location as to where it's going to look for a snip. Does that sufficiently answer your question?
I think it has. Please let us know if it hasn't. There's another question from an anonymous attendee. If we do our contributions testing off of a payroll register that includes all of the employees, but we're only testing for 10 of them, how would we go about this? Okay,
then you would be able to extract all of the information from the payroll registry using form extraction. Then, of course, after that, you would only use the snips that you need for the information you have, as it will by default extract everything. That is a very good question, though, because that also illustrates how the repetition function would work. So if you have a very lengthy payroll register, you would apply the repeat per line option, as your page with payroll register details will include multiple names on the same location. So the systematic approach with the keys will still remain the same, but it will search for the keys within the same page within multiple line items. And every time it finds a match, it will replicate those snips. So that would be my suggestion. And another suggestion could, of course, be to create manual snips. But of course, we prefer to use the automation functionalities as they're quicker and save time.
Yeah.
Then I think in light of the time, we need to proceed.
Yeah.
Form extraction will appear in our next example as well. So if you have any questions, we can get to them later too. So now that we've extracted all of our information from W-2 forms, we want to reconcile them to the individual participant statements. Rather than using manual snips, we're going to use DataSnipper's automation functionalities again, which include document matching. And by clicking on document matching, we see that we need to configure our full document matching setup. Now, as all of you should be familiar with document matching, we're simply going to dive right in. And firstly, we need to make sure that we have the files included. So we're going to click on the Add Group button. We're going to choose the group name, which will be participant statements. And we're going to import the files directly from this group menu by clicking on Import, which will bring us to our file location. There, we need to go to folder participant statements. I repeat, we're going to go to participant statements folder in 3.contribution testing, and we're going to select all of our participant statements. Now, I have already imported them previously, so I'm only going to select all of the Excels. And then click Open. And all of these Excels will now be imported into DataSnipper. And it's very important to note that DataSnipper will convert these Excels into PDF, as you can see here. And it automatically selects them for us as well. So all I now have to do is click OK, and we see that my group with participant statements has been created. I simply tick the box to ensure that this group is now active within document matching, and we can start our process. So before we now dive into setting our document matching output areas and input areas, we're going to define the header row. And our header row starts in row 14. So we're going to type in row 14, and DataSnipper will now highlight this row for us. Then we see that we want to snip 2 values. So we're going to create a second row with the plus button here. And we're now going to start defining the input and output areas. In our first input column, we're going to be using the employee name. And we're going to be looking for the elective deferral amount. So we're going to select column B in the first row here and D in the second. We've now defined where DataSnipper needs to look. And we're now also going to define where the output snips are going to be placed. So we also see that the header names already give rise to where we want those snips to be added. And by using the dropdown, we can very easily locate those cells as well, as the header names are included as we've defined the header row, where we also select column E and F to make sure that we have both of the input and output locations consistently in the correct location. Of course, you can define any output location you would prefer, as long as it's not on another column where you've already selected a column as input, as you cannot define input and output columns to be one and the same. So now that we've configured this, all we have to do is click Match All Rows, and DataSnipper's document matching will scan through all of the participant statements, as we've defined that this is our active group we want to search in, and will create the snips for us whenever a match is found. All that is left to do for us now is to click on the snips and to indeed validate that the correct information has been snipped. And we already noticed that for one of the last items, we seem to be missing an employee name. So I'm going to click on the employee contribution snip that was made to investigate why it's different. And we already see here that the employee participant name is missing a T. So that would be an exception, as we are missing a value. And you can use the exception snip for that to indicate that something is incorrect. And as we discussed in our previous examples, you can now add in comments or change the contents of this cell to make it more specific. And this has now been allowed us to very easily extract the information and compare it. All that we now would need to do is just create a formula to calculate the accuracy of these items. So all of the values that we have snipped, we can also use in regular Excel calculation. So we just create one calculation, drag it down, and we indeed see that no differences are included. We also see that the totals match up, so there is no issue for us here, and we can conclude on this procedure. Are there any questions?
Yes, there are. I'm trying to keep up with answering all of them. Let's see. Some of them are still related to the form extraction you did before. So maybe going back to that, there's a question from an anonymous attendee. What if the item in box 12A isn't always D? So what happens then with your extraction?
Very good question. So with form extraction, we define our snip location. It does not allow us to search for dependent variables. So in such instances, what we could, for example, do is we could create a document matching search where it would firstly search for whether or not D or DD or any other item is included. You would use a different way, but unfortunately with form extraction, you would not have the ability to say, okay, choose the value where D is extracted. What you could do is you could elaborate on this form extraction by also extracting the value by simply drawing your snip over this. So you include it in your output and we simply extract all of them. Then in the output location, we would have the ability to select the relevant areas we want and would still be able to extract all of the information in one go. Any other questions?
Right, yeah. One more about payroll registers. Some payroll registers are formatted in a way where you do like a period-to-period comparison per employee, or like an overview. How can you extract the data from those types of detailed payroll reports?
That's a very good question. You would have to look at all of the details you want to extract and configure which information you want to extract and simply use the repetition area you would like to use. So that would be per page. And you would then have to define in that file all of the snips you want to extract so that it's also replicated in the other areas. Although it's a bit difficult, of course, to provide a solution without seeing the document myself. I think with the configuration options you have within form extraction, playing around with it will definitely help.
Cool. And then maybe the last question is around templating. So how can you reuse this form extraction template that you built on other extractions that you want to do?
That is a very good question, and that is also included in our next use case. So I'll save that question and I will show it to you while opening the next file. So we can close this file again, and we can then proceed to our second to last example, which is participant loan testing. So please go to folder 4, participant loan testing, and open the Excel file called participant loan testing. Now, in light of time, I see that it's already pre-populated. Let me open the blank version. Right, there we go. So upon opening our participant loan testing template, we will see a number of things. Firstly, when we look at the sample tab, we already see that our sample data has been included. Our sample data is included in a separate tab as the template we created has formula checks that will validate the information which we snip in our participant data tab. So we will skip this tab and move right to participant data, where we see that we have a very elaborate file, including lots of checks that we're going to be performing, where we already see that manual snips have been applied to make some snips on the plan details, as we'll be comparing all of those details with the underlying information, and these will identify our boundaries for the tests. So we're going to be using individual loan agreements. And like we've seen with the W-2 forms, Form extraction is a very easy way to easily extract information from structured documents. And we're going to be doing the exact same here as well. So we'll navigate to DataSnippers tab, and we'll click on form extraction again. Now, what this template already includes is it already includes an example file of the layout that we're going to be including. So if we click on Get Started, we already see that there's a snip here included. So this would mean that if we now upload any other loan agreements, then DataSnipper will automatically recognize those keys and add the values here. So we'll close the form extraction window again, and we'll import our documents first by going to Import Documents and then going to our learning materials, where we will go to participant loan testing, and in the loan agreements folder here, we see 10 loan agreements. We're going to select all of them and we're going to hit open. Now, all of these loan agreements have been imported, as we can see here in our drop down. If I now go back to form extraction and click on Get Started again, we will now also see that all of this information has already been extracted automatically without me even making a single change to the values that had already been snipped. That is because you can create templates by simply uploading one of the previous files. So therefore, if you ever create one template with form extraction, you can simply save that file, get rid of the other files that were included, and DataSnipper will recognize all of these keys already for us, so we can leverage off that. In version v4.1, which is coming out in the next few months, you also have the ability to save templates. So you would no longer have to manually create all these snips. You could simply select one of your saved templates, and DataSnipper will then search for the keys as part of that template and create the snips for you. So as we've now only had to upload our files, we can simply hit extract, and form extraction will create all of the snips for us. We'll then omit the first row, as this was our template file, and we'll copy in only all of the other items by using Ctrl+C, going to our participant data tab and pasting it in cell C14 with Ctrl+V. Now, it's important to note that this template also includes multiple automated formulas. So it will enrich the template data based on all of the snips we create. So with this form extraction, we've now been able to extract all of the loan details from the agreements. Now it's up to us to reconcile this to all of the underlying support, such as the participant statement and the amortization schedule. And this is where, again, by clicking on document matching, we will see that we've already created some templates. So we see that we've already configured multiple document matching tests, which you can simply add here on the top right corner with the plus button, where we've already created the groups. All that is left for us now is to simply add the relevant documents. So in our document matching settings, we're going to start with participant statements, and we're going to click on the pencil. We're going to use the import function. And we're going to import all of the participant statements. There, again, I already imported them. So for us, we're only going to select all the Excels. And these will then be imported and selected. Now, of course, we need to make sure that we define a name, which is already included, and we click OK. And now we see that these documents have been allocated to this group. All that we have to do is click Match All Rows, and it will automatically match our setup. Now you will notice it only searches for the social security number, as we don't have the balance as of year end yet. What we could now do is, based on the snips that document matching made, is simply go to the documents by clicking on the individual snips and snipping our balance as of year end, which is included here under liabilities. You can simply right click on it as well and create snip. Now the value will be included in the cell that I had selected. We'll then go back to document matching again, and we'll do the same for our amortization schedules, where we'll repeat this process and add all of the files by using the import functionality. We go to loan amortization schedules and we select all of our files there. I click on open, and now they're imported, and I click on OK. Now, before we initiate this document matching, we will need to create the manual snips of our balance as per year end, as we see that this is one of our input values. For demonstrational purposes, I will select another one to make sure that we can display that these values are searched for. So we can simply select all of those files by clicking on the previous snips of the social security number and easily navigate to the correct files. I'll then click on document matching, and I can now hit match all rows for amortization schedules by making sure that I'm on my second test. The ability to add more tests makes it possible for you to create multiple document matching setups without having to reconfigure the existing one. So you can add as many as you like. Of course, it needs to be workable. So if you have too many, then you might not be able to see it clear anymore. So let's click on match all rows. And DataSnipper will now then search through all of the values and create the snips for us, where we see as well that it utilizes our balance as per year end and searches for those in the amortization schedules. We then again proceed to the next column where we see that we can start performing manual snips as well, where we need to validate whether the amortization is at least quarterly. And for that, we would use the validation snip and would simply draw our snips on the location where we want. So we want to see, is the amortization at least quarterly? And we see here number of payments per year 4. So that's at least quarterly. So let's validate that. If we then walk ourselves through this full sample, we also see that the next few checks are also individual assessments where we would also use the validation snip. For that, we would then locate the relevant file, which would be loan agreement number 1. And we would need to check if everything has been signed. We would replicate the same manual snipping. So we look for the signature. It has been signed. We'll do the same whether the participant is married, and we see indeed that a spouse is present. So we snip this, and the next one, oh, it's also been signed. So we create another validation snip. So it easily allows us to scan through and validate these areas. We then do the same for the remaining steps, which will all be manual snipping. And then at the end, we made reference, of course, at the start that in our sample tab, we have our initial sample data. Here, validation checks, check the data included from our form extraction area and the individual sample information we imported. So this shows you that in one workbook, we're able to utilize a lot of DataSnipper functionalities to make it an incredibly easy process of testing our participant loans on various levels and high levels of detail. Now I'm very curious to hear, of course, if there are any questions, as this is a very condensed file with a lot of features to show.
More a remark, thank you. But the other questions are answered for all of them that were asked. So please, everyone, feel free to post more questions, and otherwise we'll continue with the session.
Yeah, okay. Now I see we have a couple minutes left. We have one example to show, and I have a few questions I'd like to pose. So I'll pose the question first, and then we'll quickly go to our final example. Note that today's session is recorded, so if you need to go to your next meeting, don't worry that you'll not be able to attend the remainder, as this will be recorded and you have the ability to rewatch it. So my main question now is just based on the examples you've already seen, is how much time do you think DataSnipper will save you during your EBP audits, based on the current examples we've seen, but also maybe other examples that you think might be useful? Now, maybe good to define this. I think this would be on an individual engagement level. I see various answers ranging from huge to minimum. This is good to hear. I think the main takeaway here is that it saves quite a few hours, so that's good. That's, of course, what we like to do, and our mission as DataSnipper is to empower auditors across the globe to make you spend less time on repetitive tasks. And I think with these examples, this would definitely help. Okay, well, in the background, you can still continue to send in your feedback. Let's proceed to our final example. And this will be included in our files again as part of folder number 5, financial statement procedures, where we will open the file called assessing plan FS. So of course, after assessing all of the individual accounts and doing all your detailed testing and other areas as well, such as eligibility testing, you of course also want to assess the final plan financial statements. And we're going to do that on multiple levels. We're firstly going to reconcile it to the trial balance, where, as you can imagine, we're not going to do manual snipping, but we're going to use DataSnipper's automation functionalities. So by going to the DataSnipper tab, we will use document matching to match the TB to our FS. So by clicking on document matching, we already see that it's all been pre-configured. We only have one document present. So all we have to do is click match all rows. And I think this very clearly illustrates the power that it can bring if you pre-configure your templates with the settings you need, particularly if it's a very standardized procedure where you only have to add in the client-specific information and you can leverage off your settings you've made. So now we have a direct tie-out. Similarly, we will add a column to check if everything is indeed consistent. We can derive this from the document match as well, because it would only match if it is consistent, but it's always good to visualize that indeed no differences are present. So we've now made sure that everything ties out, and we'll also assess the individual snips made. But now, after tying it out, you also need to assess the individual financial statements. And rather than doing this manually and footing the financial statement sets manually, we can also ask DataSnipper to do this for us. And there's a magic button here called Find All Sums. And if you click on this button, it does it within seconds. So as you can see, DataSnipper has now scanned through the planned financial statement set. It's a fairly small one, but within a matter of seconds, it has created text snips of the total amount and used sum snips to recalculate the individual sums. Therefore, we now only have to scan through these snips and through the document to see if everything has indeed been calculated correctly. Please note that Find All Sums only create snips of values that are indeed mathematically accurate or likely mathematically accurate, which means that in the event it's not mathematically accurate, no snips will be included. So if we scroll through this file, whenever there's a sum which does not have snips, such as these, this could be an indication that something is mathematically incorrect. So we would need to recalculate this manually and to see if indeed this is a sum, where we would simply use the sum snip to add or remove any of the sums. So if we draw this down here, of course, we need to make sure that we add in all of our details on the correct cells. And you could simply add it up. Now, of course, it needs to make sense. So we would delete this snip and we would continue to scan for any sums which are not included. But it illustrates that you now don't have to spend as much time on manually recalculating all of these sums and can leverage off Find All Sums. Are there any questions about Find All Sums or document matching for the matter we presented?
Yeah, there are questions that it went really fast. And if you can please repeat or maybe explain how to engage the feature.
Yeah, my apologies. I will reiterate. So if we go back to our tab, after performing our reconciliation to the trial balance, we see that we've created a reconciliation. Now we also want to assess the mathematical accuracy. And in order to do so, we will make sure that we have our file present in the document viewer. Find All Sums works on the file that you're currently viewing within the document viewer. So whenever we have the financial statement set present, and if you would have other files as well, make sure that you have the financial statement set present. All we then have to do is click Find All Sums, where DataSnipper will scan through the file, will recalculate the mathematical accuracy, and for the items where they are mathematically accurate, it will include the text snip for the total amount and the sum snip to recalculate the sum. It will do this in a new tab which it creates, where you also see a mention of the individual pages where the snips have been made, allowing you to easily scan through the individual snips. Does that sufficiently answer your question?
I hope it has. There's a question around document retention. Many of documents after extraction are not retained in the file. Will the functionality in Excel remain if the documents are deleted?
That is a good question. If you remove the documents from DataSnipper, you will see the contents in the cells, but you will, of course, not have the linkage with the underlying document. So a good way of illustrating what you will see is basically closing the document viewer. And this is what you will see when you open your Excel. You will see the contents and, of course, the colorings, but you will not see the linkage. So all information you snip and include in your workbook will be there. Any other questions?
Nothing much. Maybe to add to the document retention, you have flexibility to also remove pages that you haven't snipped or whatever. So you have some options there.
Yeah, it's a good addition. So in terms of removing documents, you can also choose to only maintain the pages that have certain snips, such as exception snip or only snips, or you can indeed remove files in their entirety by using the remove button. This was the last use case that we were presenting today. Now I apologize for overshooting by 4 minutes. But before we close off, I'm curious to see what other areas you think DataSnipper could be applied to in your EBP audits. Has it triggered some interest in other procedures where you think that DataSnipper could be of added value? And if so, please do share them with us so we can also continue to further expand all of our learnings. I see quite a few good use cases coming in. Of course, DataSnipper can be applied in all types of audits other than EBP. We're primarily focused on EBP audits in this session, so I'm very curious to see where else you would like to apply it. Okay. This looks good. Now, today we covered quite a few use cases and we've covered a lot of details and various functionalities. And my apologies if in some cases we went a bit fast. Fortunately, the recording will be shared at the end, so you can also rewatch some of the areas you would like to see. But if you're curious to also continue your learning after today's session, then you can do so on DataSnipper's website, but also directly from the DataSnipper tab. So you see, if we go back to our Excel workbook, that we have a Learn button here included in our ribbon. By clicking on the Learn button, the learning menu on the right-hand side will be prompted. In this learning overview, you see two tabs, the use case and the features. This is basically a library where in the use cases part, we have a list of all of the areas as to where DataSnipper can be applied, where we see that under test of details, it, for example, also makes mention of confirmations. By clicking on confirmations, you're sent to the DataSnipper knowledge base, where you will find an explanatory article and a video explaining how DataSnipper can be applied on confirmations, where it also includes example files and templates, so you can experiment with how DataSnipper can be applied on confirmation testing, for example. The same is available for all DataSnipper's features, which will bring you to the knowledge base where you can see explanatory videos and files to test and learn more about the individual features. If you then want to bring your learning up to the next level, you can set up a Learn track with the Set Up Learn Track button here, which will allow you to receive periodic updates from DataSnipper about new use cases, new knowledge base articles, but also training opportunities as the one we attended today. DataSnipper's product leverages off all of the feedback we receive from our clients, as that helps us to further improve the product. Therefore, you will also see a feedback button here in the DataSnipper ribbon. By clicking on the feedback button, you are sent to our feedback portal, where you can share any features you would like to see in the future or any areas that you think could be of added value, where by using the request feature form here on the left-hand side, you can select the category where you think an addition could be made, and you can provide an explanation of what you think would add more value to the product. You also can see all of the other feature requests sent in by others and have the ability to upvote them if you feel that this is a great idea. The more votes, the higher the chances that this update will be included in future development. If you're interested to see where DataSnipper is heading, you can click on the roadmap, which will allow you to see what changes are coming up in new version updates, but also what is coming down the road in the future. And like our product, we also continuously want to improve our sessions that we provide, like the one we did today. So therefore, we have included a QR code, which will bring you to a 1-minute feedback survey. I'd like to ask you all to scan the QR code with your mobile phone and let us know what you thought of today's training and what you think could maybe be done better in the future, as we continuously want to learn and improve our services that we provide. We've now reached the end of today's session. Are there any questions before we close off?
Don't see any questions, Elliot, only thank you.
Great, that is good to hear. Well, if you do have any other questions coming up in the future, or are very curious to see or discuss any of the contents we presented today, then please do not hesitate to reach out to us by email or through our website, and we'd be happy to attend to your questions or discuss them further. I hope you enjoyed today's session and that you learned a lot, and I hope to see you guys soon in our next session. So thank you very much and see you next time.